Now in this video, I want to kind of continue this somewhat confusing scenario about SQL Server data tools and how we get those so that we can build some of these SQL Server Integration Services complex data transformations. Now, let's talk about Visual Studio. Visual Studio is how we're going to build those complex data transformations. It's how we're going to utilize integration services. And let's talk about getting Visual Studio. Now, you're going to do it in one of three ways. You're either going to get the full Visual Studio versions 2010 or 2012, or you're just going to download SQL Server Data Tools, install them, and it will put the shell environment for Visual Studio. But let me talk about Visual Studio here in case you're not really up to speed on this product. It is Microsoft's flagship integrated development environment platform. It's an incredible programming environment. I use it. I've used Xcode, which is Apple's programming environment, and some other ones. By far and away, I like Visual Studio the best, okay? And I'm not getting any cuts or commissions or anything. That's just kind of the way it is with me, okay? Now, Visual Studio in 2010 and 2012 both have trial versions available out there on Microsoft's website. So if you don't have these and you want to download them and play with them in this course, you're certainly capable of doing that. Just go to Microsoft.com, do a search for Visual Studio 2010 or Visual Studio 2012. You might even search Visual Studio 2010 trial version and so forth. But they're very easy to find. You can install this, and this trial version will run fully functional for 30 days. And you want to make sure you get professional version or higher on both of these. Now, you need to be aware, depending on the version and humidity and curvature of the earth and all that, you're going to look at either a 1.5 to a 3 gigabyte download. So it may take a while to get this down to your machine. Then once you get it down and you kick off the setup, you're probably looking at least 20 minutes before the installation is completed. So again, don't kick off the download thinking that you're going to knock this out in 10 or 15 minutes. It's just not going to happen. Now, let me give you a confusion alert here. If you've been around SQL Server and integration services and all those sorts of things, just be aware they've changed everything up with SQL Server 2012. Previous SQL Server versions use something called BIDS for integration services and reporting services and all that. And of course, BIDS stood for Business Intelligence Development Studio. Well, we still have that. You'll see in different versions of Visual Studio, at least early on here, we're still seeing Business Intelligence Development Studio projects, and then inside there you'll see these other ones. But SQL Server Data Tools is the new name for what we've always known in the past and heard referred to as Business Intelligence Development Studio, or BIDS. So just be aware of that. And again, let me say it one more time. There's two scenarios here. If you have Visual Studio already installed and you download SQL Server Data Tools, it'll just kind of meld into Visual Studio. If you don't have Visual Studio installed and you download SQL Server Data Tools, it will install the Visual Studio integrated shell, and then it'll install data tools into that. Just don't let the terminology confuse you. But for some reason, Microsoft seems to be just kind of brushing over all this and all their documentation, and it's really very confusing to see what you need on the data warehousing side. Now, let's talk about the system requirements. If you want to download a full version of Visual Studio, either just to try it out to see it, or if you're a developer, then you still want language support so you can still develop products in like C# or VB.NET. And so you'll want to have data tools open up within one of those full operating versions of Visual Studio. Just be aware, if you're going to go the full version route, the system requirements for Visual Studio 2010 are you need to at least be running Windows XP with Service Pack 3. Any edition except the Starter Edition will work. It can be the 32 or 64-bit versions of XP, and any operating system later than that except any kind of Starter Edition. And again, 32 or 64 bits, fine. If you run 64-bit and 32 in the right configuration, you're going to get the WoW environment, but that's totally up to you. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. You need at least a 1, and sometimes there's differing versions out there. Some say 1.6 gigahertz CPU, but get 1 gigahertz CPU or faster. Pay close attention to the or faster part. You'll need at least 1 gigabytes of RAM. You actually need more than that to not hate your life while you're doing this, but the minimum requirement is 1 gigabyte. Notice with Visual Studio 2010, you need at least 3 gigabytes of available disk space. This is to download the product and install it. And then notice Visual Studio 2012 system requirements. You need Windows 7 Service Pack 1 or later. Then that goes all the way up through Windows 8, the server operating systems, and so forth. Same thing, 32 or 64-bit OS, no problem. You do need 1.6 gigahertz CPU or better. Pay close attention to the or better there. You'll need 1 gigabyte or more of RAM. Pay close attention to the or more part. More RAM, the better. And watch this, 10 gigabytes of available disk space. That's not a misprint. So this thing's going to eat up some space, but Visual Studio 2012, I've glanced at it briefly. Some really cool stuff going on in there. And I won't turn this into a Visual Studio course. But anyway, that's kind of the details on getting Visual Studio and some stuff to help you maybe keep you out of the high weeds. So that's the basics on getting Visual Studio.